Good afternoon. Welcome to the latest episode of Propelling New York Forward, a series of conversations that we at MedTech are pleased to sponsor with thinkers, leaders, and innovators across the biomed industry. I'm thrilled to welcome today Randy Wolken, who is the president and CEO of MACNY, the Manufacturers Association of Central New York. And we're going to spend some time this afternoon talking about building nimbleness and an ability to react to changed circumstances, both in the manufacturing environment and really across organizations. Randy and MACNY have really been an innovator in the space of supporting manufacturers across upstate New York. And Randy himself has a kind of fascinating background that we'll spend some time talking about, some experience in the not-for-profit world, in the military and other places, and he brings that expertise to bear in his current position. Before we open it up to conversation, I wanted to make sure that I thanked, of course, our sponsors, Regeneron Pharmaceuticals, Barclay Damon, MPR Associates, Fuse Hub, Fisher Scientific, Regeneron, and Gilroy Kernan and Gilroy. We could not make these conversations possible without the support of our sponsors, and so we thank them and the terrific work that they do in not only sponsoring us here at MedTech, but in helping to drive forward the growth of the biomed industry across upstate New York. We've always got room for more sponsors, and so we'd love to hear from you if your organization is interested in sponsoring, or if you just want to learn more about MedTech and the work that we're doing, you can find us at medtech.org. We're working remotely these days, but anxious to connect with all of you out there. So again, my thanks to our sponsors, and just a reminder that this series runs every Thursday at 2 o'clock. You can register for the entire series, it's free. And if you've missed any previous episodes, you can download them from our website, again, at medtech.org. With that said, let me introduce Randy Wolken. As I said, he's the president and CEO of MACNY, the Manufacturers Association. And Randy and I had really kind of the good fortune to spend some time, a little more time together than we would normally have, as we kind of dove into the problem of the COVID-19 pandemic and spent some time on some calls trying to connect needs to resources and vice versa. A little bit of what I think I'd call kind of guerrilla connecting as we did it. And Randy particularly impressed me with some of his observations about the need for our communities and for our systems to think about ways to be better prepared for the next crisis. And with that, I'm going to ask Randy, perhaps you can start off, Randy, by talking to us a little bit about MACNY and where your organization fits into the ecosphere.
Yeah, thanks, Win, for inviting me to do it. You and I were talking about before, we spend our lives now connecting with people through this mediums, and thank God we have the tech people to help us do this, but I'm getting pretty good at Zoom now. So it's a net benefit and an awful crisis that none of us would wish on our worst enemies. I think the reality is we as an organization have been around a long time. We're 107 years old, started as the Manufacturers Association of Syracuse. And so that really brings us back many, many years. And then more recently, we have continued to expand our footprint and our connections to organizations that are like us throughout the state. I'm also president and CEO of the Manufacturers Alliance in New York State, which spans from Long Island to Buffalo. And in that vehicle, we also work with about 2,500 organizations. So MACNY itself is 300 plus manufacturers, primarily what we'll call central upstate, about 26 counties. We provide a whole host of services specific to manufacturers, and of course, many non-manufacturers that support the manufacturing sector. We do training We do a lot of events. We used to do a lot of actual events in person, both training and large events. We did about 300 event days a year. So our business really had to be radically transformed when you're going from a business where you're spending a lot of time in physical contact with people to an entirely virtual contact. I know when you and I've talked about this, when you go virtual, in a week, which we all were asked to do, a lot of change has to happen. We've also been working with our members in getting reopened. And I think that's been the hardest challenge. For some of our members, they never completely shut down. They were essential businesses, and they had to pivot quickly to be open safely, and they've continued to upgrade their skill sets, and that's been incredibly important as well. So I'll stop there with a little bit of background, and then we'll jump into the conversation with you, which I'm actually looking forward to. Thanks for inviting me.
Well, listen, I'm wondering, if you could walk us back a little bit, Randy, certainly, and I think this will be true for most of our audience. Most of the folks here with us today have been working in the industrial or commercial sector in upstate New York, many in the manufacturing space. And for those of us old enough to have remembered it, right, the New York State that I grew up in the 1960s and into the 70s really remained a bulwark of large, heavy industry manufacturing, whether it was multinational corporations like Kodak and others. Manufacturing was really the strong suit across much of what I think of as the Erie Canal corridor, and it's been a difficult transition, as many of those large legacy companies have either scaled back or pulled out of New York. And I'm wondering if you can give us a sense of, from your perspective, where's the trajectory of the manufacturing ecosphere in New York, and who's thriving? What allows some organizations to thrive? What can you tell us?
Yeah, the manufacturing sector went through a significant transformation, as we know. There was a significant loss of manufacturing during those earlier periods, 50s and 60s, and even beyond. New York State remains, though most people didn't realize it, one of the top manufacturing states in the country, still top 10 manufacturing, but it's different. It's not very large companies and organizations, the ones that we all recognized, right? Carrier and Kodak, and those were the types, or Xerox and Bausch and Lomb, for example. But the small, medium-sized manufacturer continues to make up the bulk of both the employees and the opportunity. They're more nimble. They can be more responsive. They do fit into what we now know is an international world of manufacturing. And that was the case. And we were actually seeing a resurgence in manufacturing, in not only in this state, but throughout the country during the growth period, which was a very long growth period for the country, which is, to our credit, as a nation growing, continuing to grow the economy for a longer period of time. And I believe that at that time we were going to continue to head in a positive direction. I do think that COVID-19 has re-scrambled the deck, so to speak, on a lot of key issues for manufacturers. There's a real awareness now that we want to make things in this country that we don't want produced other places. We want it readily available, for everything from PPE to pharmaceuticals to maybe even more other essential products that we think we don't want disrupted by either this pandemic and its consequences or future pandemics and or other disruptions. So I do think that there'll be new opportunities for companies in the manufacturing sector when it comes to reshoring, which is being talked about a lot. There's a lot of conversation in Washington about this, as well as New York State. So I do think we've got a lot of strong performers. I know you represent many of them who have a great opportunity to continue to thrive as we come through this somewhat uncertain but challenging times, so I'm optimistic about the future. But I do believe that we can be strong in manufacturing. I think one of the things I've noticed, and I was noticing this well before this COVID-19 crisis, was we're positioned to do well because manufacturing of today and tomorrow is all about high tech and really high talent. I mean, you need, I keep reminding people, the more technology becomes complex, the more the talent matters even more. It's inverse relationship. You have more tech, you do need a lot of talent. So I think having talent, we've got great learning institutions across the higher ed spectrum, as well as great schools at all levels. So I think we are positioned, once we come through this, to do well.
You know, as you were talking, Randy, I was thinking particularly about opportunities that we may find in reshoring, and I'd like to talk a little bit about that. But it also occurs to me, just before you stopped, you really talked about the depth of our educational resources, and certainly many of us are familiar with the problem of the brain drain that we see across so many places, including upstate New York. And I guess I'd like your thoughts on both how do we begin the process of reshoring, and in terms of both production facilities and capability, but also, do you have some thoughts about kind of reshoring with respect to talent, the huge number of college graduates who are coming out of New York State institutions, or folks who are born here and maybe looking for opportunities? This certainly isn't, I mean, if you've got a quick answer, that would be terrific. But I'd really kind of be curious to know what you're thinking on these issues.
Yeah, you're right. I don't have a quick answer. Those are really good questions, and they're complex, right? But I do believe there's we needed a willingness, and I think there's a willingness to want to make things in America again, not just for economic reasons. You know, that often drove products and services, but products in particular overseas to get it cheaper and expensive. That's not a driving factor, as in some areas, and shouldn't be in your area, medical. It shouldn't be in certain critical issues. Having it, $1 less for your mask or $1 less for your medical equipment, or so to speak, is not got to be the goal. It shouldn't be the goal anymore. So I think people are realizing the need to have a strong manufacturing base. I think people have always respected that kind of work, and today it's really technology work. Everybody is a technology business if you're making things today. So it's all a high tech business. So I think the challenge is that we've become so interconnected throughout the globe, and the supply chains have become so stretched that what you're going to need to do is bring part suppliers back, and you're going to need to go through a longer term process of bringing people back, and specifically bringing facilities back. I think we have the people. I think you got to have the facilities and the equipment here. I think governments need to play a part of that. We spend a lot of money, a lot of taxpayer dollars on things that need to be made. And I always believe that we should be thinking about how do we make sure those dollars go to New York State entities if you're buying PPE, from a government agency, for example. How do we create competitive advantage to making these things again in this country? So I think there's a lot of work to be done on reshoring. I think the cost differential was already shrinking. In fact, when you actually looked at, this was before COVID-19, people look at the true cost, not the cost on your balance sheet or the cost on your P&L, but the real cost of having the extended supply chains. The cost differentials weren't meaningful anymore. That cheap labor, which isn't cheap anymore in lots of parts of the world, and since it's so technology driven, that wasn't the biggest contributor to your cost anyway, have really narrowed the gap. I mean, before the crisis, we were projected to be ahead of China or any country in the world for the best place to make things anywhere in the world. So this is before COVID-19. I think it's even more so today with a more stable economy, more stable currency, generally speaking, than other parts of the world. So I think we were well positioned to do and to bring manufacturing back already. This could accelerate that. And interesting enough, on higher ed, it's one of the most interesting transformations I think any of us have seen in how to do education. I know colleges right now that will probably do about 30% of their students teaching them the old way, where they'd be in a classroom. I mean, 70% of the classes in one SUNY college I know of that is going to be taught differently. You're either going to do you're going to do it, watch a taped version of it, or you're going to be there live like this, or you'll do both, And since we have to be flexible, we'll tape everyone and you'll have a chance to view it. So we have a significant capability in the higher ed space. We have the largest systems, colleges, number of colleges, and our state system's the largest in the country. Boy, what an asset when you decouple it from space and place as well. And interesting enough, students all want to go back. There's none of them that want to stay home in their parents' basement. So they want to go back physically on campus. I think that'll end up recovering and be a stronger market, after COVID-19, as some people are taking a break. But I think the whole higher ed space is going to change. And to me, the key to higher ed in its capabilities is our ability to be a place to live, to be a place to work. And that's how you keep people from leaving. People are mobile today. So if we have great companies that you represent and great companies that I represent, and our communities are great places to live. And by the way, big cities aren't as popular right today. I think small cities are again a potential for resurgence, especially since the work from home will be even more prevalent. I remain optimistic that we can stop the brain drain from happening. In fact, we've seen it slow, and in some communities just go the other direction in terms of young people wanting to leave our communities, and that's positive.
I'm wondering too, if you could, let's see if we can put, to the extent that we can, kind of some meat on the bones of a couple of those concepts. Certainly I understand our members understand the challenges in modifying supply chains, right? We have spent so many of the members, of course, in the biomed space, right, who are in the medical device space or in the pharmaceutical space, have really become incredibly dependent on supply chains that are global. Perhaps without a full understanding of some of the vulnerabilities that placed us at.
Sure.
So here we are, recognizing those vulnerabilities.
Yes.
How do we begin the process of finding new supply chains, finding new connections, whether you're from the manufacturer's standpoint or from the device or pharmaceutical company? How do we begin to bring them together? And perhaps more selfishly, from my perspective and yours, how do we make sure that happens here in New York State?
That's a great question. I think that's what every manufacturer or producer of goods today is asking themselves. If I want to reduce my risk, which many of them want to reduce their risk, how will I find the provider here? And the closer the better. I mean, I think they all know that. They like to be clustered together. Clusters of industry has been along, more recent, maybe the last decade or so, but clusters of companies are what we want. And people want talent clustered together. So there's a lot of economic incentives to have clustered companies with clustered talent. But then finding them has been the hard part. Though I think the dawn of these kinds of technologies, the use of AI and the internet give us this capability today, which would have been a lot harder to do, even 10 years ago, certainly 20 years ago. But I think the ability to find people who would want to produce it and the people who could do it could be done in these virtual formats. I know even I had members that were doing international work primarily because someone could find them on their website and they could begin to contract with them, and they'd find a way to get the money to flow in terms of payments. So I do think that there will be some innovative solutions. I know that's taking place in the hiring space. And we run a talent platform as well as many others today. They're all connected today, and people are finding talent in ways they didn't find it before. And I also think that, the production itself will continue to change. I think what we're coming through is, I like to call it the great acceleration. Because, if you look at the use of technologies today, they've just been accelerated. And the world looks very different today. So I think these are all the parts that play into figuring out, okay, now I have to produce my product, and I don't want to be as globally stretched, and I want to be more resilient, so I'm not, going to be hit again by the next pandemic or the next crisis. I think companies that, if I had to think of the best solution for companies, is like, I need to put a team on it right now. I need to start asking myself how I do this. How do I specifically source my products in this country or in countries that are less likely to be disrupted. I think Asia in particular is feeling the impacts of the, in terms of if you're a U.S. producer and you're getting parts from Asia, maybe even more so than Europe, you're feeling the impact. But we all know that in this environment, you may be feeling also those same impacts if you're in Europe.
And let's talk a little bit, Randy. I'd be curious to know kind of what brings you, Randy Wolken, to this space. You've had a varied career. You spent some time in the military. For a while, you were running a feeding center for the poor, and now for a number of years have been with MACNY. Give our viewers a bit of a history of Randy Wolken. What motivated you? What brings you here? What are your passions in this area?
Yeah, I've had the good fortune of now being the presidency of MACNY for about 20 years. But if you had asked me if I was going to end up in this space when I first started in a small town in Nebraska, I said probably not. I wouldn't have known this job existed or this opportunity would have existed. But I ended up starting out at high school, went to West Point, the U.S. Military Academy, and from there was stationed at Fort Drum, my first assignment. Really kind of fell in love with upstate New York with my time at both West Point and living in Syracuse and then up at Fort Drum. When I left the service, got my master's degree in public administration from SU and ended up going to work for the county. Did that for about 6.5 years. And then really I was given an opportunity to go do something that was, tugged at the heart, run the Samaritan Center, which is, is a feeding program. We also did some training for people who wanted to transition into the food service industry. And then, I was interested in change at a political level, so I tried to run for office and was not successful. I'm kind of glad of all that. I ran small nonprofits and was recruited to come because of some of my capabilities to be presidency of MACNY. Like I said, almost 20 years ago now. I really love this work. I think you and I share this passion for helping companies and helping individuals through those organizations that really are the bulk of and really the stalwart of our communities, these great companies that produce wealth and produce intellectual property and outcomes. It's harder, this period of time is harder on a lot of us because we like to be with people. I like to be like you do with individuals and hang out and solve problems. I mean, I've always tried to be a problem solver and help people. And that, those, all the things that I've had a chance to do, serve in the military serve at the meal program. And of course now is just help people do things, get things done. And that's been my community roles as well. But, so if there's a problem, and this is probably the biggest problem we've experienced in our lifetime, sign me up. I'm ready to go, and work on it. But I'll tell you, it's the most disorienting time in my professional experience. With not only do we have a pandemic that's threatening us, now we have an economic crisis that's threatening us and a lot of uncertainty. So yeah, we have a lot of work to do as both organizations and as individuals and as companies, right, to bring this economy back, to put ourselves on good footing again, and to keep this community going. And the challenges are real as we come back from this pandemic. As you and I have talked about before, I'm involved in a daily call with the regional control room. So we're trying to navigate the reopening and making sure we keep the curve where it's at. I do believe we've been tremendously successful in flattening the curve, which is not true in 19 other states now, which are on travel advisory for our state. So that's good news. But all of that sort of adds up to both interesting and I call it opportunities to serve and be a part of a community. And Denise and I, we've been here now we've raised our children here. 2 of them have left back to the brain drain, and I wish they would come back. Maybe after the pandemic, we can try to entice them back. But we do love the community, and I've loved what I've landed, and luckily I really enjoy the work.
So I don't know if you have a plant out there, or if this will mean something to you. One of our viewers has sent a question asking if you're from Schuyler, Nebraska, because this person says that he understands there are many smart people from Schuyler.
He must be
I
from
have to confess,
Schuyler.
I don't know Schuyler, Nebraska, so
I do know Schuyler, but your viewer will recognize, maybe it's a small town. Actually, ironically, it's a little town called West Point, Nebraska. And
you went from West Point to West Point.
I have the unique distinction of going from a little farm town called West Point, Nebraska to West Point, New York. And it's a little farming community in northeast Nebraska, closer to Sioux City, Iowa, than it is to Omaha, but it's in the east part of the state. And I do have family all over Nebraska still. That's really where they're primarily still there. I go back once a year at least, and real close with my family. But Nebraska is a great place to grow up. It's very flat though. If you like flat places, it's really flat. Rolling Hills, where I'm from, but that's it's funny. You don't run into a lot of Nebraskans in New York. I know a few. So anyway, to your viewers, tell them say hi. We may have relatives. Who knows?
Can you verify that there are smart people in Schuyler? I mean, do you have any?
Yeah, I think there probably are smart people. That's at least the safe answer.
I guess.
Yeah.
And let me listen, at the risk of putting you in an uncomfortable situation, but hell, why not?
Why not? We're friends.
We're right. You talked about having an interest in elective politics, and now find yourself perhaps just as glad that you didn't end up in that role.
I am glad.
And it makes me wonder, as we talk about initiatives and programs to both support industries, whether they're manufacturing or otherwise, in this country, in this state, in our communities, so much of that is by necessity the function of government. And I'm curious to know your sense. I don't think it's particularly shocking to say to anybody that it feels like we are in a really period of partisanship, and in some ways in some bothersome dysfunction. And I guess I'd be curious to know, what do you think? How do we beyond despairing about the political climate today? Are there ways that our organizations and companies can survive, can help change that dynamic, perhaps find workarounds?
Yeah, our organization does advocacy, as yours does, and we actually engage in the political process. We have a political action committee, and I think we have to be engaged. I find, so we are engaged on behalf of members. And things have changed over the last 20 years in that space. I think it's important to be engaged. I'm, like so many people, dismayed by the dysfunction or the inability to find solutions together, to have really good civil conversations and to be able to move forward. I think it's frustrating for most of us that we can't find better solutions. And being a problem solver sort of by nature, I wish we could solve problems and move on to the next problem. And we have plenty of them to solve, which is probably my biggest frustration, both as a citizen and as someone who works in this space, that we don't get a chance to work more together, and we don't get a chance to get problems solved. And communities have similar problems, similar challenges. We ought to be able to find ways to move forward on them. So, but I do remain hopeful, and I do remain engaged because we need to be. It's not something we can sort of, throw in the towel and say we're not going to do this anymore. I think it's also incredibly difficult to be a political leader today, be given the state of affairs. It's difficult to be a uniter, bringing people together and having really good conversations. And so I've built relationships with a lot of elected officials in my roles. I've worked with 4 governors and their teams over the course of my time at MACNY, and I've worked with everyone from Hillary Clinton to Chuck Schumer still. And so I do work with a wide variety of political leaders in our organizations together, both the Alliance and and MACNY does a lot of active work with our state representatives. And I actually enjoy doing that with them. But it is so challenging to do that well today. It's harder than it's ever been in my 20 years of doing this work. But I still remain hopeful. Maybe that's my demeanor, hopeful that we can find good solutions. And by the way, I mean, you know, if they're younger people, I would encourage them to, one, stay involved, and two, if you want to run for office, we need great people to run for office. I think you need a thick skin to do it. And I think, quite frankly, we do need great leaders in that space. So I would never discourage anybody from doing it. It wasn't my niche, but I have stayed involved like this by contributing to the community and by trying to find smart solutions. And, you know, when you and I probably get our, you know, our best kudos when we offer a solution, right? I mean, that's kind of often what's needed today. Is like, what's the solution? What could we do different? How do we make it better? And when we show up with solutions, political leaders are much more interested in hearing from us because, you know, they're caught in the middle of all this, you know, in many ways. So tough. You and I are friends, so you can ask me a tough question like that. But reality is, it is the right question for the time. Is how do we find solutions to long-term challenges, and what's our best? How do we put our best feet forward?
Let me also remind our viewers that if you've got a particular question or comment that you'd like to make, we invite you, encourage you to do that. You can either use the chat or the Q&A function that you can find at the bottom of your screen. If you bring your cursor over it, and we will get to as many of those questions as we can. Speaking of questions, Randy, one attendee has asked, how many members does MACNY have, and from what types of manufacturer?
Yeah, so we've got well over 330 different manufacturing and non-manufacturing, primarily manufacturing members. Run the full gamut. Large companies you'd recognize like Corning, Global Foundries. These are big companies. Very small ones as well. Manufacturers like Morse Manufacturing. There might be companies of 10 to 30, or sort of that's usually the size that begin to join MACNY, because we offer, you know, a wide range of services from HR. We have purchasing consortiums. We do a lot of services. I've got a great team of about 20. We do workforce development as well. We do career exploration starting in as early as middle school. We got a pride coming out for STEM learning in elementary school. So, you know, there's a wide variety of reasons why these companies in particular would like to work with us. And we're really good partners. We love to partner with organizations like yours and others. You know, I think there are more opportunities for that in the future. So it's really a nice mix of manufacturing tech companies that really we get a chance to serve. It really is an honor and a pleasure to serve them. You know, when you work with business leaders, it's, you know, they're generally, many of them in our business, I know in yours too, Lynn, is they're problem solvers. Many of them are engineers, they're solution providers. And it really is nice to sit down at a table with a group of people like that are really there to help solve problems. But so yeah, large and small, in lots of medium, and that's really what we enjoy doing. And then our Manufacturers Alliance has the same mix throughout the state of New York.
And, you know, apropos of that point, one of our attendees asked, and I'm going to give you the question, and I think I'm going to expand a little bit on it. The question is, how do we best network with other small businesses to grow our customer base? And one of the things that certainly has been a feature of the biomed ecosphere is really over the last generation or so, many of the large companies have really shifted their resources away from in-house R&D into product development through acquisition, licensing, and what have you. Really, in some ways, increasing the importance of networking and connections. And I'd love to know your thoughts. You and I chatted a little bit before we started today. You know, how can we do it both virtually and in other ways? But are there some programs or systems that you found have been helpful in actually making those connections?
You know, I think one of the reasons why I like this business, the business that we're in, which is really an intermediary or a network provider, is we get to meet so many different people. We get to talk to so many people. We can help them solve problems. Oftentimes the best solution that I offer somebody is, I'm going to introduce you to somebody. Let me connect you. And interesting enough, I was very worried, in a week you go from all these events and all these interactions to now you're at home, send the whole team home, now what do we do? And luckily my military experience, crisis experience really paid off. You over communicate, you have lots of conversation, you just go. On the battlefield, they always say the best plans are great until the bullets start to fly. And then everything is now it's, where do we go now? Now what do we do? And luckily if we have a good, mission and purpose and good team members, you figure it out. But I think that I've learned that we can do networking like this, and it's quick and efficient. And we need to do that for now. And I believe that our events, I've told my team that we used to do like 300 events a year. Just about every year we have 2 or 3 things going on. We'd probably go back to that when COVID's over. But right now we're trying to accelerate the number of virtual events we can do. And quite frankly, we're doing more of those than we did of physical events. So I think these tools today, what a great opportunity. I would encourage people, because everybody knows how to do this now. I mean, you and I were joking about this. If we didn't have some techies to help us, we wouldn't know what to do, especially in the long ones. But by the time I'm done today, I'll have done 13 of these. And that's more than I would do in a normal day when I would go to events. And so the efficiency, I don't think this is how I want to live my life. Don't get me wrong. I want to go back to seeing you in person again. You and I having a beer together, shaking your hand too. I'm going to miss shaking hands for a while. But those are things that we need to do to be connected. And I think we're going to go back to doing those things. I also think that I sure use the tools like LinkedIn and use all those networking tools. I mean, they're relatively inexpensive to use and provide you some good benefit. But those human connections that take place in organizations like yours and mine, and so many of them, are really being valued more than ever. I think, because all those physical relationships and in-person relationships that we've nurtured over the many years, now I can activate them. I can literally, I have more sessions now with people that are harder to get a hold of in person than they are virtually. Linda Lemira and I are good friends and work a lot with Lemoyne College. And I'd see her every couple months at a meeting, or we make a phone call. Now I can do a Zoom call whenever I need to. And people are expecting that sort of contact now. So I think the human element of the work that we do will come back. I'm with everybody else. I wish it was tomorrow. It's not going to be. But I think the network elements of our lives are going to grow. And I'm becoming incredibly interested in how do we grow networks virtually. And we're starting to make connections with providers in Europe. You can do that now. I mean, I've been on Zoom calls, conferences, in fact, that have European presenters free of charge. Now, they may charge in the future, but now I can do that stuff. I've got a new coach that I'm using to help me in the writing space. She's from Vienna. It's just fascinating what the technology now allows us to do from a connection standpoint. So in my world, I'm thinking I'm going to go back to being in person. I'm going to do all those things as the economy recovers and as we can go do that. And then I'm going to not give up the virtual. I'm going to hold on to it, not in the same balance. They'll shift more back and forth to be an ebb and flow. But our technology enhancements will allow us to do things we couldn't even imagined, even 5 years ago. We do statewide events now in a drop of a hat. How much work would it take to do a conference? It takes months of planning. Now it's let's do it next week, and we can do it.
Yeah, you do. You do raise. You hit on an issue that is of particular importance to me. One of the things, and I'm sure you must see this too, and I say this as a lifelong New Yorker, not from Schuyler, Nebraska, but from someone who grew up in Cortland, New York.
Sure.
For all too long, and this still remains a legacy here across upstate New York, is that we have allowed ourselves to fall into some parochial silos that
Yeah, we have.
we do events in Buffalo and we'll hear from folks in Rochester that that's too far away, or
Yeah.
Albany is just inaccessible. And
Yeah.
I would hope that we can perhaps, while recognizing the boundary busting capabilities of meeting virtually, to recognize as well that we have incredible resources located here in New York State, and frankly, you can be in Poughkeepsie in 5 minutes, right, or someplace else, and that we should find ways to better connect folks. I will share, at the risk of offending some of our friends in metropolitan New York, but I happened to have the good fortune about a year and a half ago to be down at the ribbon cutting of this terrific facility that Johnson & Johnson operates in New York City.
Yeah.
What they call J Labs, which is really a terrific worldwide network of incubators. And Catherine Wild, the executive director of the Partnership of New York, for New York, essentially the economic development arm for the city, stood up and said, this is a terrific example of how manufacturing can be done affordably in the city of New York. And I thought to myself, boy, she did that with a straight face. But wouldn't it be terrific? I think we can, from using a little bit of an upstater's bias here, I think we can agree that there may be some terrific reasons to bring brain power together in one place. And when it comes time to expand and do some manufacturing, we have low cost opportunities across New York that can plug in easily.
Yeah, if we can use this to span the globe, you could use this to span the state. And you ought to do that. And I do think you ought to produce things, especially within the United States. I think we want to do more of it in places that are economically advantageous to produce them. So they ought to be producing things upstate, and they ought to maybe even keep the management team in downstate if they need to, for whatever reason they want to do that. And I think, if you can be, now I can be, in minutes, I can be anywhere in the world. And so why do I have to be in some places? And I think that this is a technology and these are capabilities that our generation is now wising up to, and they're becoming easier and easier to use anyway. Even I can figure them out, so everyone can figure them out. So I think there's an opportunity. I'm with you, when I think we could generate a lot of economic growth in New York State and upstate, because you can get there now, and I don't think you have to be on a plane anymore like you used to.
Have you experienced, or do you know of any examples that you can point to, perhaps of a manufacturer in one of the more rural enclaves of New York being able to take advantage of remoteness and virtual activity to drive a business?
What's interesting to me, is I think this is going to open a lot of eyes at the leadership ranks. I think we've unnecessarily wanted to bundle next to us the things that mattered to us. So we, my office, we said, I had like one person working from home, and that was a choice that she made. We didn't want to lose her. She went on maternity leave, and fantastic employee. And I said, no problem. We'll figure that out. And then another person who wanted to do it, and, okay, but I want to keep the bulk of people here, and we're going to make it work here. And I have this footprint, right? And then you're starting to realize that, why am I even paying for all that? Why don't I even need all that? I mean, I literally have everybody at home. Now, I'm going to have some presence. I'm going to bring them back slowly because of the virus into the office, but I no longer have to have them all physically located near me. Now, I do think there's we have to figure this out. Like, how do we be together when we are distanced? Because I think you still need to be with people to get to know them and to spend time with them. That's all a part of the human experience. But I think a lot of the limitations so far have been really leadership limitations, our inability to know how we lead from a distance. Which, by the way, leading this way is so different than doing it personally. When there's many of us who've grown up in leadership ranks. I went to school to learn about leadership, at a great place to do that. You learn how to do that when you're physically present with people. That's important. But But it's really important to know how to do it like this too. How do you still connect with people? How do you recognize when they're challenged? That's why, by the way, the video call, I really quickly said, I got to see people so I can know, are they stressed? You know, I used to see that in person. You know, can I help them? And it's hard to do that over the phone call. So that's one of the reasons why I think this technology in particular makes meetings and interactions so much easier to do. So I don't think yet we've tapped into the remote capabilities. I will tell you, Brookings did a great study on this, by the way, in automation. So many jobs could be automated. Now, we don't want to automate them for lots of reasons, but I've always believed that that wasn't going to be the key. The key was then when we no longer needed you to do this job because it's very manual or because we can automate it in some meaningful way through AI and so forth, then we move you someplace else. I've always never felt that we would be a country without jobs, primarily because we've never been that way. You know, I come from an agricultural state where at one time huge amounts are in ag, and now a small percentage are in ag, and everyone's, you know, they had 4% unemployment. So the reality is that's not where we're going. But I do think, I will tell you that remote plants, that people who can monitor equipment from home, people who can run facilities at a distance, that's all a part of something that wasn't sci-fi. I mean, I knew that was already happening in my members before COVID, and I think COVID has accelerated the desire to do more of that, to do more, you know, to use these technologies to get better outcomes and to get production done. And another thing I'll share with you, just blew my mind when it's occurring. When we first went into lockdown in that first week, the data was coming back from a group that we were helping in that process, and 45% of their employees were not working in the facility. And these are manufacturers. So, you know, you ask, if that's possible, if you can actually run a facility with 55% of the people on site, what's the right mix for the future? You know, it's probably not, it may not be 100% back in the facility. Now, some places, yes, but some places, no. Maybe that talent exists in New York City, or maybe that talent exists, you know, in Watertown, where the cost of living is a lot less. Or maybe they want to move to Schuyler and work for it. But the reality is, to see big companies like Facebook and others say, well, everybody stay home now. That is a game changer in a workplace space. I think one of the things we have to do in a challenging time like this is see what are the possibilities now that we would not have seen before. And I think remote work, I think physical plants and places where maybe top leadership is not inclined to be there, or maybe there's not as much other talent and you can do it all remote. And I think these facilities, and I think people can be in much more disaggregated, work more remotely than ever. And it'll be fascinating to see how that plays out.
Well, Randy, this has been terrific. I can't believe we've blown through our time. So what I do want to, we've gotten some questions that we haven't had a chance to answer out. We'll pass those on to you, Randy.
Please.
But I do want to remind all of our participants that you can find Randy at MACNY. That's MACNY. Is it .com or .org?
.org.
.org. So MACNY.org. It's a terrific organization with a plethora of services and resources. I'd encourage manufacturers and those who are engaged in the manufacturing community to reach out to MACNY. Want to remind folks that next week our guest will be Dr. Stephen Thomas, who is the Division Chief of Infectious Disease at Upstate Medical University, also here in Syracuse.
Yes.
Who will be talking about the impact of pandemic on testing and treatment of infectious disease. And for those of you who have some available time this afternoon, beginning at 4, MedTech and MassMedic, the Massachusetts Medical Device Consortium, will be co-hosting a networking opportunity and bit of a summer social, I think long distance cocktails at 4. But you can find more information about that on our website at medtech.org. For everybody at MedTech, Randy, again, thank you very much.
Thank you,
to all of our participants, thanks for tuning in today, and we hope to see you in the future.
Thanks for inviting me. It's been awesome. Always good to see you too.
Thanks.